Hello everyone, my name is Jason Grant and I'm fortunate to be here today with Jay Mitchell. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you again for joining us today. IXDD, Trust and Responsibility. I thought before we started getting deep into that sort of topic, do you want to give us a bit of a background of yourself and how you actually got here today?
Sure. So I'm Jai. I am an interaction designer. Currently working at Google, working on the experience of using Google Maps in cars. But I've only been there a few months, still kind of feeling things out. It's a pretty big change, big company. It's been super fascinating and exciting. But I guess how I got there is kind of through 7 years of working in sort of product agency side of things in Brisbane, a company called Joseph Mark, and then doing some work for Us2 and a couple other smaller companies in between. And
I did have a look. I saw you also did some work with ABC.
Yeah, that was with Us2. So I actually joined Us2 Sydney office when I was in Brisbane to work with the ABC News team because they're based in Brisbane. And I spent 6 months working at the ABC, working on the ABC News website.
Oh, wonderful!
It was really, really amazing experience. I'm a huge fan of the ABC as a thing. Like, it's one of the best resources Australia has, and especially the news element. And so getting the chance to help work on that and push that into its next sort of iteration, which is still coming along. I'm working and waiting.
Sure. Yeah, I could imagine. So you were heavily involved in the product and the website itself. Then now with Joseph Marks, what sort of work were you doing there?
Yeah, so Joseph Mark, I actually joined Joseph Mark fresh out of going back to design college in 2011. I'd been working as a designer for a couple of years in print, but was completely self-taught and was absolutely terrible. Had a realization, an epiphany at one day when I went to semi-permanent and just realized that I had no idea what people were talking about, and I really loved the idea of being a designer, but I didn't know. I could just suddenly realize I was terrible at it. So I went back and studied at Shillington, did 3 months there, and then a 3-month intensive, and then came into Joseph Mark as a nearly 30-year-old junior, intern. And I sort of spent 6.5 years there working on all sorts of products. The first big product I worked on there was actually the MySpace redesign they did in 2012.
Wow.
That was like my first time ever working on a digital product. So that was quite a learning curve. Very. But
you've from Brisbane and Sydney, you've also done a lot of community-led sort of activities. Is that right?
Yeah, I try to. I try to be involved in community purely because I want I want to build a community that I want to hang out with.
Yeah.
That started about 3.5 years ago in Brisbane. I used to go to a bunch of meetups around, like UX meetups and visual design meetups, and around that time I'd sort of, for about a year or two, had started referring to myself as a product designer and seeing that as kind of like someone who was a bit of a generalist. Like, I was doing UX, I probably wasn't the best UX designer. I was doing visual design, I probably wasn't the best visual designer, but I could see that there was value to the teams and the companies I was working with at being the one person that could kind of help with all of it. And there wasn't really any sort of a meetup that sort of specialized in that. I'd find myself going to the UX meetups and feeling like it was a little bit too niche, and the visual design meetups were similarly niche, and I wanted to hang out with more people that had the same broad interests. So I just on a whim created a meetup in Brisbane, and on a Friday afternoon, and by Monday I had a couple hundred members, and it sort of took off. And then a friend of mine, Tim Cruikshank, who was at Us2 in Sydney at the time, hit me up and said that he wanted to do the same thing in Sydney, and then someone from the Sydney group moved to San Francisco. It kind of organically became this worldwide community of meetups.
And is that called Product of?
Product of, and then Product of Brisbane, Product of Sydney.
Oh, wonderful.
So, yeah.
I do notice that you mentioned something around breaking down silos. Do you want to maybe give a little bit around that, how that actually looks and what that means? Yeah,
I think it's a bit of a controversial one at the moment in the design industry. I think there's definitely a lot of value in having really strong specialists in any one area, but I think there's also value in having people that are pretty good generalists. I think on in my bio, I like to refer to myself as a specialist generalist because my speciality is literally trying to be as broad and as deep on as many of those things as I possibly can be without necessarily having any one thing that I kind of know better than anyone else.
Yeah, I think more and more that skill set, that broad skill set is very important. Again, it's that more holistic approach maybe to it, and to bring that to product. Again, it's never as simple as just actually, making something look beautiful.
Exactly. Like, I think there's a lot of tension between people that say that, you know, there's people saying that they're a UX UI designer, and other people are getting upset. Well, no, if you're a UX UI designer, you're not either of those things. I think there's a lot of, I think you can't really speak generally about any of these things. I like to one of the things I think is really interesting about the idea of a product designer or any generalist, whether it's product manager or any other kind of role like that, is that for the number of skills you're going to have, every single person that could fill that role is going to have a different shape.
Yeah.
They're going to fill some slightly better and others a bit worse. And you almost can't just take out one generalist like a product designer and replace them with another one and expect them to do the same job, because they're going to have some things they can't do as well and some things they can be more useful in.
So you've worked with quite a few teams in different organisations. How do you approach, especially you're fresh at Google, how do you approach building a team, and how do you get that sort of that trust going through that team?
Building a team, or like joining a team and then learning to work.
Well, let's start with build, and then we can go to the join aspect.
I honestly haven't done a lot of building teams myself, as in hiring and starting from small. I think so much of my career was working in a product agency where there was kind of, I might be the only designer working with a particular client for a while, and then at some point in that process, it wasn't so much about hiring and building a team. It was pulling one of the other designers from another project in the agency to join me and help me out. And then sort of sometimes at the end, we try and help people build their own teams, but it kind of, didn't always work out that well. And because there's a competing interests of like helping someone build a team also means like, well, they're going to stop hiring, and then it gets tricky with agency.
Yeah. So when you do join a team, how do you sort of develop that? Again, you've got a lot of different skill sets throughout that team. I suppose everyone's always evaluating each other and where they're at, and where, someone can bring something and someone else. How do you approach that amongst the team?
I think it's just good to go in and be open-minded and be humble and authentic and honest, and just own up to your flaws, your unknowns. Just make sure not to. I think if you go in somewhere, the worst thing you can do for building, speaking of trust and responsibility, but the worst thing I think you can do is to join a team and then just start acting like, I'm the designer. You hired me. You should listen to me and my design opinions.
Yes.
I think the best thing you can do is just go in and listen and sort of soak up as much as you can, understand as much of the different ways of thinking and approaches and people's kind of pet hates and pet projects, and really get a feel for all that before you start throwing too many opinions around. And
that's good. Oh, we actually got a question from, I'm hoping I'm saying this right, is it said Raymond? So according to you, what is the key factor that differentiates a product designer from any other designer, like a UX designer or a visual designer?
I think it's a UI UX designer. This is where I think this whole thing, it gets into this sort of technically at the moment my role at Google is an interaction designer. Externally, I'm called an interaction designer, but internally we call each other UX designers. And I still consider myself a product designer. So I think titles are kind of a bit of a it doesn't really matter as long as it's clear what you can offer and what you can bring, and you're self-aware on where your skill levels are at with certain things. I don't think a product designer really differentiates from the idea of a UI UX designer that much. Maybe I'd like to think the product designer brings with it a little bit more. It's not saying that you are better at doing things like product strategy or that kind of thing. It's more just saying you want to be involved in that a bit more. because that's kind of where I was going when I called myself that. It wasn't so much just about doing the UI and the UX. It's the product strategy. It's thinking about how you're going to measure the performance of the product, how you're going to measure the success of a product, the whole thing. It's kind of almost like, I guess, almost taking like some things that would sometimes be seen as a responsibility of a product manager, and like trying to grab a few of those as well. But it's not I don't see it in terms of like a clash with product management at all. In fact, I think it's great to work with a great product manager when you both have concerns and interests about these kind of things.
So do you define the roles quite clearly for everyone, or do we keep that generalist approach, or how do you get the best out of everyone? Because if you have your manager and then you've got your strategist as well as your designer, how do you sort of define that aspect?
I think that's an interesting one. It depends on the team and the size of the team and the stage they're at. Like, I think that if you're a early stage company, you're sort of just getting started, you've only got budget to hire one person, then maybe hiring a generalist does make more sense. If you get to a size where you can afford to hire 2 or 3 people, then maybe sometimes it might make more sense to have really strong specialists in a few areas. Sometimes it might make sense to have a generalist and then a specialist in maybe brand and visual and a specialist in research and strategy. For instance, like, I think the sort of model we have in my team at Google is, in my opinion, it's kind of what I will always talk about as being my ideal actually turned out to be the way that my team that I got hired into is set up.
Oh, wow.
And I'm pretty stoked on it, in that there's a handful of us that are generalist interaction designers. There's 4 of us. And then we have 2 full-time UX researchers that kind of really go out to do everything from early discovery sort of research through to doing our usability testing. They don't do it for us so much as like we get involved in it with them, and they're just the specialists that will own it and do all the synthesis and a lot of the synthesis and whatnot. But we're still very much involved in that. We also have visual designers that will really help us polish our work at the end. It's not about this kind of the old-fashioned model. When I first joined the industry, was like the UX researcher, UX designer does this, and they hand wireframes to this person. That person takes those and does fills out all the interactions, and then that person takes it and hands it to the visual designer, and they apply the brand and the polish. And that was a silly model that I just don't believe is very productive. This is more of like, there's a few people that kind of own a feature or an idea from end to end, and they'll work with specialists to help them in certain areas and to do the heavy lifting and the research and the visuals and stuff.
So how does the strategist, because you go across strategy, or you have your passion as well within strategy as well as the execution. So where does the strategy go, and how's that?
That's a tricky one at a place like Google. Like, I wouldn't say that I've been doing that much product strategy.
Okay.
I think there's way too much I don't understand or know about things, and there's too much to learn. At this point, I'm still pretty fresh there. So like, I wouldn't count that as, I'm definitely feeling more of the role of an interaction designer there, which is what my title is. Whereas previously to that, most places I was at, I was being more into the strategy and whatnot.
Yeah, so strategy again, and execution again, they can easily work hand in hand, and they can complement each other, or vice versa. When it comes down to design, is there any things you look for inspiration, or where do you go for?
As in getting to the sort of the visual side of things, the interaction.
Or even when you say, when the brief is sort of started, and you have an assignment attached, how do you originally tackle that, and where do you build from that?
Again, like, the worst answer, but the only answer in a lot of these sort of questions is it depends.
Yeah.
Depends on the problem, depends on how well scoped it is, depends on how well you understand the kind of the need and the how it's being used now. So it changes every time. Like, I think some projects, some things you might come in, you'll have this vague hunch that we need to do something, and there's little to it, and so you've got to really do that formative research and make sure that you even understand the use case and that people that are using it for. Make sure you even understand their actual context they're in. Make sure you understand what they want to get out of it. Like, there's so much that you might not actually know, and if you just go on your assumptions, you're probably going to make mistakes. Whereas other things, it's kind of like, well, we already have this feature and people are using it this way, which is not the way it's meant to be used. So maybe we should make that easier. Like, you can do some a bit of validating, make some prototypes, check that that's not just like a false signal, and sometimes you don't need to do all of that.
Yeah, you touched on the user before. How involved are you with users and user groups?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like at Google, obviously we do a lot of research, and so we'll get people in pretty regularly to come and try things, or we'll do. There's been a bunch of research doing drive-alongs with people in their cars, looking at how what they need and what they use, and so that kind of stuff. And the same thing at every other product I've worked at. You try to be as close to them as possible. I think that it's way too tempting for designers to just imagine that they can empathize and that they understand, but it doesn't matter how good you are at empathy.
We empathize with everyone.
Yeah.
Is that right?
You're going to miss things because you're not actually them, and you don't actually have their context and their needs. So, but when you watch people doing it, so you pick so many things up.
That's actually a really good thing to approach it by, because we do sort of try to use our empathy as much as possible so we can understand what we're trying to execute. Yeah. So it's good to take that back seat.
Yeah, exactly.
Put it into practice. How did you begin to learn around your interaction design? Because you've got some wonderful design elements on Dribble and so forth.
I've been digging in.
Yeah,
I haven't used Dribble for a couple of years.
Okay.
It's I mean, I think that was a lot of that came originally from so because I studied as a visual designer, graphic designer, and then joined an agency that was doing product, and then through that role. In the early days, I was we had a kind of a sibling studio called Breeder, which are a motion graphics company. They did things like the titles to True Detective and a couple of other TV shows, but they do a lot of ads and really cool motion graphics. That was Joseph Mark's sibling studio.
Yeah, and
they were kind of like a subgroup within the agency, within the studio. So whenever we would do an interaction, like a product design, we'd kind of give them mocks of the interface, and they would make them move and go crazy for launch videos and whatever. And I kind of got fascinated with that and started just asking questions, and eventually just learned how to use After Effects to make my own prototypes, motion prototypes in that. And I was kind of going down the path of like, oh, maybe I want to get into motion design.
It is very exciting.
It was super fun. But around the same time was sort of when I started discovering UX and getting deeper into that. And I found myself at this kind of like, I want to do all these things, but I have to pick one. And I was kind of almost being forced to pick one. Like they were sort of saying, I remember one annual review, sitting down with my creative director and the CEO of the company. And I was like, look, Jai, you've been here a while now, and it's really great that you're interested in all those things, and you're useful here and there, but like, you need to pick one. you need to specialize. And I kind of went away and thought about it for a while, and that was actually
the red pill or the blue pill.
Yeah, well, that was actually when I think someone like, I think it was I can't remember his name now. Mikkel, someone had written this Medium article about product thinking being the next big thing in UX design. I was like, oh wow, so that's what, when they talk about product designers, that's what they're talking about. And discovered this whole concept, like big companies like Facebook and whatever had this concept of a product designer, and I was like, that's me, that's what I want to do. And I took it back to the agency and I said, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to be, can this fit in? And they were like, oh, we'll give it a try. And then about a year, 18 months later, or maybe probably 18 months later, I noticed that they'd started hiring people as generalist product designers, and almost everyone they've hired since, I think, is kind of be expected to have a bit of that broader generalist knowledge.
Oh, wonderful.
And it kind of, I think it hopefully that's an indication that it showed some value to have people like that on the team.
Definitely. Do you want to maybe go through some examples of some earlier projects and what you learned, and how you've sort of progressed to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I did bring some visuals, but
we can hook it up.
No, it's probably too much.
Okay.
I didn't plug it in before, so I didn't think I was going to go into that. But I guess like back in the day at Joseph Mark, there was a lot of we did a lot of things like smaller apps for different startups around the world. A lot of our clients were in the States because of the MySpace thing. We had a bigger client base over there than we had in Australia, even though we were all based here.
Yep.
So I worked on all kinds of things, from like I remember working on it was like a startup that wanted to make a version of Instagram that you could purchase from.
Okay.
And
Makes
then that
sense.
shut down shortly after Instagram announced they were making purchasable posts.
It does.
So
how
which
did
was
you...
one of the first things that I pointed out when I joined that product, but no one wanted to listen to me.
Yeah, I was curious to say how you've created something which basically Instagram also created. How did you compare the designs?
Well, that was a tricky. I quite liked the design, but I came into that product quite late, and the direction was set. I specifically remember one of the first things that I said being, "What happens if Instagram makes a buy now button on their thing? What happens to this product?" And they're like, "Oh, that won't happen." And it was like 7-8 months later, they first leaked screenshots of it. So yeah, it was the product still was nice. I think it turned out really nice. It was just a real it's not an example I put in my folio and stuff, but there's been a lot of things like that kind of find yourself doing in studio agency world, where sometimes, and I think that a lot of agents like Joseph Mark I know have done a really great job at trying to remodel their whole business model of how they work and engage, and us too, when I was there, they're going through the same sort of thing, trying to find ways to engage with clients as more as like partners, and have less of a defined scope and timeline and deliverable ahead of time, because that's just not how good product's built. Good product is generally a bit of an unknown of what you're going to come out with when you go into it. You know you've got a problem, but you shouldn't really know what the solution is yet. So how do you quote for that? It's a big problem that I definitely learned a lot of things doing them wrong by having an agreed timeline and deadline for something that we were like, this isn't actually what anyone needs.
I suppose it shows a lot of maturity in the industry itself, and even how clients also, want to work on that. If I go back for that, there was examples where you would have like a big product release, and then 2 years later you got to revamp and redo that whole product again. So now it's slightly changed, and I'm sure you could expand on that.
Well, I think the way that we talk about that. So when I was at Us Two with the ABC, the actual engagement I was there for was actually a digital transformation engagement, where basically they were trying to take an organization that, like most organizations that did that kind of thing, everything had been very project based. So you have like, we've got this much budget and this many people for this long to build this thing that we've decided ahead of time exactly what it'll be. And then inevitably it goes over time and over budget. Eventually it launches, and the team and the budget gets dissipated into other things, and there's no continuous improvement. There's no iterating and improvement. And so then moving things to more of a product thinking, product-minded approach is effectively around saying, well, no, we need to have a set budget and a set team around this product. They're going to spend time on it, and they're going to release something that's not going to be great to start with.
Yes.
But give it 6 months, give it a year, and it'll iterate and get better and better, and it'll get better based on actual use, not what was decided in a boardroom 18 months ago.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. Couple of questions we got through.
Yep.
Is there a particular person or thing that inspired you to get into design?
Oh, that's a really tricky one. There's a few different points in my life that I got into design.
Yep.
I actually we're back. Something happening. When I left high school, I actually had done a couple of units of graphic design in high school, and I remember a family friend sort of convincing me that I should get into web design, because that was a real growing industry, and this is in 2000.
Yeah, very smart.
And so I did. I went and studied multimedia, but I decided to move to the Gold Coast, and I did multimedia up at Griffith Uni up there. And at the time, it was a pretty fresh course. It was a sort of a poor cousin of the Brisbane campus multimedia course, and I wasn't that engaged with it. So I actually got distracted by uni into studying film, and I wanted to be. Then by the time I finished uni, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I'd gone down this whole other path. And then I finished uni, and obviously didn't have much success in film, but then I got into music, and then through playing in bands and managing venues and putting on festivals, the couple of units of Photoshop I'd done came in useful. I had to make posters,
of course,
and then eventually just needed a day job to more sort of solid day job to pay the rent while I was playing music, and decided to go and get a job as a designer and started making coupons. And I spent 2 years making really, really bad coupons. And so that was like that was kind of finding I can do this. People were willing to pay me for it, but I wasn't that into it. And then it was a couple of years into that where I went to that semi-permanent and sort of saw what real design is and the power it could have and the amazing things people could be doing with it. And I'm struggling to remember who actually it was who even spoke there that year. It's the only one I've ever been to. But it left me just floored, and I just sort of had to go. I'd actually already left that coupon job and went and travelled for a bit, and then when I came back, I was like, no, I want to do it, and I went back and studied. And so I'd say that it's kind of been a thing that's been around since I was a teenager that I always kind of wanted to do, but I kept like getting dragged away from it and back into it. And
so
there's no particular person that inspired me to get there, other than maybe whoever was speaking that semi-permanent in 2011.
11 was it? Yes. I have to have a look. But they do have some really great speakers there.
Oh, it's amazing.
So that one, thanks again, Sid, for that. Another one from Dean. So he said, as a designer, how do you deal with your doubts?
I absolutely don't. I think doubt is something you need to actually embrace a little bit. Like doubt, to me, I think if you don't have doubt, you're probably more dangerous a designer than if you do. You should pretty much be doubting everything you do and trying to validate and prove to yourself and prove to everyone else that what you're doing is the right thing. But there's the deeper and darker part of that around self-doubt and I still, I have that too. I think that it's just a matter of trying to keep that, be humble and keep trying to work hard and keep a growth mindset on things. But you will always have doubts, and you should always have a healthy level of doubt. I'm not sure if that's quite answering the question.
No, I think maybe there's never an exact answer on that. I think maybe sometimes whenever you have an idea or something, do you maybe try to put it to a test, or we A/B test or whatever? Does like sometimes to break the mold, you just really need to think totally different. And whenever that first time it happens, it's never accepted. I think when people view it and they're like, no, that can't work because of X, Y, Z. Do you ever get that position where you can actually put that out and say, hey, actually, and that does validate whether it was a doubt or an idea?
Yeah, I think as much as possible, I think everything that I work on, I'm going to want to try and at many stages. So like very early on, I might just have a bit of a rough concept, and I think it's good to just sort of take that around the office to some other people and be like, hey, does this make sense to you? But also like as you get a bit further and you start progressing a bit more, and you're starting to get a little bit more certain around, confident in what you're doing, you might start to do more formal kind of user studies, like whether it's kind of just putting in front of people and seeing whether they will use it or how they use it or if they can use it. And then eventually there's things like A/B tests and whatever, but I think ideally they should be a bit of a last resort and just to make sure that nothing goes terribly wrong that you haven't thought about. But I don't like the idea of kind of using that as a way to validate whether you made the right decision or not, because then you kind of like
outside your
sort of experimenting unwillingly with people that didn't sign up for that.
Very right.
They're just trying to get something done.
Yeah. I was curious around, you got strategy, interaction, prototyping. You've also, UI, UX or whatever. Is there any area, I know you have a strong interaction, prototyping, is there any things that you do in that you would recommend to audiences and so forth?
I'm not much of a, and I don't know if this is, I don't want to try and word this right, but like I like to be a bit of a omni tool kind of person. Like I don't like to lock into any one particular tool. I think that as far as prototyping goes, there is a prototyping tool for every occasion, and in some things XD might be the best tool. In other things there might be other ones that suit that particular use case better, and I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that I don't think any company is ever going to make one tool that satisfies every need perfectly. And I think if they're trying, they're probably going to suffer in some other areas.
And it's true, yeah. So I think there's always like tools for certain uses, absolutely. Just with prototyping, it's more about, is there anything that you know, any principles around that you actually use moving forward with your designs or anything around that?
No, again, it depends on what you're trying to test, I guess. Like, I think prototyping can be anything from, a simple click-through prototype with, it's a fairly linear flow just to make sure people follow and understand what's happening, or it can be something that's almost high fidelity, almost realistic. Recently been doing some prototyping where it's basically a real thing. It's fully coded by an engineer, but it's just done with, rubber band and sticky tape behind the scenes. And it depends what you're trying to prove and what you're trying to get. I think there's an interesting concept that I try to like bring up whenever I'm doing any kind of testing, where it's like, am I trying to validate something or am I trying to invalidate something? Where if you're trying to validate something, you might be just trying to validate a need or a sort of a mental model that people have around how things fit together or work. And for that, sometimes you might only need something lo-fi. And what happens then is if it doesn't work, it doesn't mean you invalidated it. It means that maybe your prototype wasn't good enough. Maybe there's some other things that went wrong. But if it does work, then you've proved that even with a even with a cheap and nasty thrown together click-through prototype, that the concept stuck, people understood it, and you can pretty comfortably say that even in that less than ideal scenario, this made sense to people. Then I think you can say you've validated that concept or that direction. If you want to try and invalidate something, if you want to try and like prove that, or like if you want to be able to say like we tried that and it didn't work, then you almost have to build something really nice. So you can't blame any of the failure on the poor prototype. You know what I mean? Like
100%.
You need something that feels so nice and is so responsive and works so realistic that if you're going to come out of that and say like we tried that and it didn't work, people couldn't use it, or people didn't understand that interaction. I mean, you can make that inference from some lower fidelity prototypes, but you just have to be careful, I think, about where you draw that line on how high fidelity you go.
Yeah, I previously used to work in advertising, so we would sometimes put 3 concepts forward, and you may have a favourite, and maybe a least favourite. Least favourite was always picked. I have a couple of questions from Austin. So he said, "What's something that you wish you knew going into the design industry post grad?"
Okay, something I wish I knew then. I guess I wish I had. I wish I had the words and the framework around the idea of having a growth mindset that I learned much later. I think early on I was so crippled with doubt and would do it. I was definitely that person that kind of like never asked questions originally for the first sort of 6 months. I was like really hesitant to ask questions. I didn't want to look dumb. I was terrified that everything I showed that everyone was going to judge me and all of my ability based on that one thing. Whereas when I sort of later on came to sort of understand and read the book Mindset by Carol Dweck and get like a vocabulary around that to be able to realize that that's what I'd sort of, by that point I'd kind of adopted that anyway. Like I'd learned that you learn much better when you're just happy to be wrong. Yeah. But then when I got the vocabulary around it, just made it all so much more sense to me. I wish I'd had that sooner. I think realizing that the only way to learn is to get things wrong.
Yeah. Some is experience and as you said, it's always true. He has another question as well. So when you have creative blocks, what are some of the things you do to help get yourself out of that? It's a good question. I don't know that I believe in creative blocks in design. I think because I just don't think that design isn't really like an art in terms of like pure creativity. It's a process. It's problem solving. And a creativity block, if you're having a creativity block, then maybe you need to go back and make sure you understand the problem you're trying to solve better. Maybe you need to go back and make sure you've done the whole process to where you are properly. That you have all the context you need.
I think if you're at a point where you're trying to think up crazy ideas and you can't think of something, then you might be doing something wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
That could be a controversial opinion, but like, I just think there's always a way you can go back and make sure and question. You go back to first principles and question things at a deeper level to make sure you even understand what you're trying to solve if you are running up against that kind of thing.
There's always, when it comes to creativity, there's one thing that I've heard before, and it's sort of when someone is creative, they're solving a problem, but they're solving it in a unique way, and that shows creativity. So, and as you said, sort of go back to the start, have a look at what it is, and then you can solve that. Yeah,
and I guess in that situation, there's definitely been situations where, like, you know that there's a particular interaction that needs to work to make something work, and sometimes it's just a matter of like, I mean, the old good artist borrow, great artist steal, is it? Am I getting that right? But I mean, sometimes it's great just to go and look at how other people have solved that problem, similar problems on other platforms or in other contexts for other, different verticals, and just try to like, just take it and try it. Like you might end up using it, but if not, it might just be the thing that when you apply that to your particular context, all of a sudden like, oh, but if I did it this way, and it just will unblock you because it just gives you a new perspective. But then sometimes you also just use it because it works.
Yeah, good advice. Here's a nice question from Varanchi. What is the process that you follow for the new product development?
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, it's been a little while since I've done much new product development. I think the last time I did much in that way was probably in my last kind of year or so at Joseph Mark. Okay. Everything I've done since then was kind of already somewhat established. I've done new features maybe in existing products, but I think when you're looking at new product, there's a whole other thing that comes with it where like you're actually trying to figure out who the audience is and like who's going to use it, what needs they have at a much broader scale. So the process that I follow for that, I mean, process that I sort of was a part of, it was getting started at that studio was we had a 2-week engagement we would do with new clients we called a recon. And it was basically just 2 weeks. Myself, I only did the first one. The first one they ever ran was myself and a strategist, design strategist, who's more of a business background, like understands business models and all the economics and that kind of stuff much better than I do. And the two of us would just get in and really dig into the problem space and the competitors and the needs of the market and the needs of the client, their business, and really just try to like make sure you have as much of that groundwork covered as possible, so that you can come up with a bit of a hypothesis for like, we think this is the problem that is the best opportunity for you to solve might be this, and we think that it could work like this, and now work with us some more so we can try and validate if that's true or not, but we don't,
So after you've come up with, say, you've reviewed the problem and have a solution move forward, then where does it go from that?
Yeah, so in that case, we came out of that not necessarily with a strict solution, but kind of like solution directions that we thought might be interesting to explore. And then we kick off an engagement with them, and that's why I only did one of them, is because then we kicked off that engagement, and I worked on that project for a year. Okay. And that was that project was a golf scoring app, and I don't even play golf, so that was neither of us played golf. So there's a lot to learn when you honestly don't know the first thing about the market, and you've just got to dive in and just start trying to learn and ask people and talk to people and
that's excuse me. That's where I did see the little on Dribble the little golf, that which I thought was very
my loading spinner that we didn't use because it was a bit of a over engineering a solution to a problem that didn't. I made a loading spinner that actually ended up, because it had to finish the animation, it would make every load take longer than it needed to take. So obviously it wasn't ever going to ship.
So for those who haven't seen it, it was like a ball that would go around a hole and then sort of fall in. It
was kind of like the idea of like the ball would get bigger and smaller, like it was rolling around the hole waiting to fall in. I had that kind of like...
It was nice.
You can look it up on my Dribble.
I got another one from said, have you got into a situation where you felt the solution you have provided, and maybe this is where we've just touched on, is pretty much saturated and there are no more solutions for it, actually?
As in...
So have you got in a where you felt the solution is maybe, I'm taken that this may be around that whether everyone has already done this 100 times.
Yeah.
And there's maybe no different way to approach it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of some specific examples, but there's definitely things like that where, you know, there's people that will come to you and say, oh, we want to build this thing. You're like, oh, but that kind of already exists and it's doing well. And what's your differentiator? How are you gonna build a following in a market doing the same thing that someone else already does? And oh, but we're different because we do this. And it's like, well, that's not enough. Like it's not a big enough differentiator. It's kind of that's definitely a thing that happens a lot, and I'm sure every designer has faced that with clients.
MySpace and
MySpace is a tricky one. I mean, I was way too early on. I say that was my first project I worked on, but like my main job was, I think, making the GIFs for the help section and rebuilding every asset for the whole site at 4 times the size for the animation things. Like I didn't do that much full actual interaction or UX or anything at that point. It was more just like being a bit of a Mac operator as a first grad project, but yeah, that was an interesting one just to watch in terms of, you know, a market that was saturated. But that was internally, I think the agency, everyone in the studio was kind of trying to nudge them to say maybe we should change the name because we're changing the product. It's becoming a media consumption, and it became a really beautiful media consumption. Like movies and audio had one of the biggest music libraries in the world at the time, bigger than Spotify was then.
Wow.
And we're sort of saying like, but if you hold on to MySpace, everyone thinks it's a social media platform.
That's right.
But you know, there's obviously reasons that they wanted to keep that and whatever. But then because of that, that's kind of what got it. It never really broke out of being seen as a crappy social media platform.
That's all right. I was just gonna wrap up in a few minutes. So any further questions, please shoot them through. But I just really wanted to know, is there any examples that you have of some really practical or useful apps that you really like and you've seen?
Gee, put me on the spot with that one.
I did throw it.
Practical or useful apps that I've seen or like. I mean, can I pull out my phone?
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, it's flat. I can't even do that.
That's all right. We can. I was even
in terms of for design process or just in general.
Yeah,
life,
just how they answer. Like say, you know, I don't know if I want to throw names out, but say Airbnb. You know how it approaches, you know, accommodation and so forth. I find real estate ads are very clever in that. Okay, well, this is really what you want to do, and this is how you're going to use it in a mobile environment as opposed to a website. You know, I find, you know, just as a quick example.
Yeah, look, I should have prepared some examples.
That's all right.
I can't specifically think of any. But
okay, how about the app? So you've done a couple of other social apps, Trello and Willow.
Oh yeah, wow. Right? We have dug into the archives. Trello, they're still going on. They're a little startup from Brisbane that I did some work with. It's another one of those funny ones where, like great product, great people. It was just a funny little short engagement where, you know, what they asked for and what was agreed before design were brought into the conversation. It was kind of a scope and a deliverable and a timeline and a budget.
Right.
And they wanted a redesign of their app, but there wasn't any time, there wasn't any budget for research or anything, and so effectively became a bit of an IA restructure and a visual overhaul of their app. But then, you know, I spent 6 weeks basically on my own redesigning about 200 screens of their app.
Wow.
And then I think they implemented about 3 things that I designed. I haven't looked for a little while, but I did look a while back, and some things that I designed years ago were still started because they're only a small team, so they can only implement so much at a time.
That's right, yeah.
And it was just one of those things where, like, had there been more of a conversation around strategy and design strategy in the beginning, probably would have been able to say to them, like, actually, well, you don't need a full redesign of the product, you just need a bit of a restructure and or let's not do the restructure. Let's just look at a rebrand, and there might have been other better ways to manage that engagement than what I think it ended up being.
Well, that's well. Again, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate you sharing everything. It sounds like you've gone like a wonderful journey.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Now, I believe there's a roundtable going on soon. So if there's any further questions, I think we'll address at the roundtable.
Sure.
But yeah, really appreciate your time.
Thank
you again.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Cheers.